Good evening. Welcome to the Tuesday, October 8th, 2024 regular meeting of the Stoughton School Committee. This meeting is being recorded by SMAC for future broadcasting. Please rise if you're able for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item on the agenda is public comment. As no one has signed up, we are moving right along to our student advisory representative update. I would like to recognize Colleen Figueroa. So thank you, Colleen. This is our first meeting, so we'll be kind.
Thank you for having me. So sports are going well. Fall sports are beginning to wrap up as they are holding some of their final games this week. They have been holding their senior nights and pink out games, and they've been having fundraisers at their games, such as bake sales. Winter sports registration has opened up and will close on November 29. Student Council will be holding Trunk or Treat at the J-Law up at the high school from 6:30 to 8:30 on the 29th. Where sports teams, clubs will decorate their car trunks and give out candy to anyone who comes. Elementary school students are primarily invited. Each grade has also been collecting class dues for school events. We've been planning for homecoming, which is taking place on November 2nd. We've started collecting money for tickets, finding decorations, and also finding a DJ. This Saturday, our marching band will be hosting the first ever U.S. Bands of Massachusetts and Rhode Island state finals. 19 bands from all over the state and from Rhode Island will be coming to our school, taking the SHS field and performing their shows. The Marching Black Knights will be performing at 6:30 p.m. and tickets are $10 online and $15 at the gate.
Thank you. Any questions for our representative?
Yes, I have a couple.
Sure. Here, Mike.
I always ask this question. What are your thoughts on the long block, and what are your friends saying about the long blocks?
I personally like the long blocks. I like how I can get a lot of work done in, like one class period. I've also been liking the flex block in between. That's where I can get a lot of work done, kind of have like a little brain break in the middle of the school day. And a lot of people in the school have also been liking them. I haven't heard, any major conflicts about it. They've been taking advantage of the flex blocks and, also using that time to get a lot of homework done and taking a brain break as well.
Oh, thank you. One more question. Can you give us your thoughts on the lunch cafeteria food?
I don't have any sort of major conflicts with the cafeteria food. It's actually been pretty well so far. I think today was like Mandarin chicken with like fortune cookies. They have a lot of variety up at the high school. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much. All right. Unfortunately, Dr. Baeta has a family medical emergency, so he is unable to attend for the superintendent update unless, do you have one, Mr. Ford?
Well, we can throw a few things out,
Sure.
Although a couple of my items were just picked off. So thank you so much for getting me ahead of the game. But I did want to let people know that we do have a virtual elementary school building committee meeting tomorrow, October 23rd at 7 p.m. So people interested in getting more information about that project can tune in. This coming Thursday, is a half day for all students. Our elementary schools will be having parent-teacher conferences. The secondary faculty and staff will be participating in professional development. Thursday, the 23rd at 6 p.m. is also the CPAC meeting, which is a virtual meeting. We'd encourage any parent with students who receive special education services to encourage them to attend that meeting and take part in CPAC. I also want to state U.S. Bands. It's just a great event. 19 bands from across the Commonwealth. My son will be competing there, not for Stoughton. So I'll be rooting for 2 bands that day, but they're in different divisions, so it doesn't matter. But it's just a great event. We held off a lot of years from hosting, and now that we have just what a wonderful complex, it's just a great opportunity for us to host. And the feedback in the past has been spectacular. I also want to talk about just a little bit about our internal evaluation cycle for school improvement. We are entering the phase where we develop data action plans. We're expecting the principals to be giving data action plan summaries from FY24 to the superintendent by October 31st. We anticipate new FY25 data action plans to be submitted by November 15th. And those are generally based on MCAS, but they can be based on other data if that data shows a better trend or a more coherent or impactful trend than we might see in MCAS. And what we're expecting to do also is have all the principals meet with the superintendent to review the data action plans, as well as conduct an MCAS performance review by the 1st of December, and that'll take place with the superintendent in person. So in terms of our own improvement cycle, that's where we're at. So thank you for the time.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Just a quick question. What are some of the other data sources that schools use? Does everybody mostly use MCAS or like?
Well, MCAS,
are there a
that's the
couple?
big ticket item,
Yeah.
because that's how we're evaluated and the data's put out to the whole community. But we have all the STAR data, we have all the different internal assessments that we run from the middle school, high school, elementary schools. So for a principal, I mean, we encourage them to look at MCAS first because it's the most public assessment we have, and it has a bigger impact. But if they can find a trend in some of the other data, for instance, the STAR data, beginning of the year benchmark, mid-cycle, or end of the year, and that data, I will say, will correlate with MCAS, but maybe show you a little more, they're allowed to veer away from MCAS and take the more impactful data.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Any questions? Oh, Karen?
Have you thought about the vote coming up? Thank you. Have you thought about the vote coming up on MCAS and how that's going to affect the schools in the evaluation process?
So that's interesting because it comes across as if it's a vote to do away with MCAS, and it doesn't. It just removes MCAS as a graduation requirement. What I would take issue with this vote is it's just a simple vote to eliminate something. There isn't actually a plan or thought behind it on how it impacts schools, how it impacts testing, how it impacts our ability to gather data and inform parents about the quality of our schools. So if we wanted to go in a different direction, I'd prefer it comes through the legislature or through the Department of Education as opposed to simply a vote where it's put out one way, potentially even misrepresenting what it is, because the conversations I hear about it don't actually reflect what the legislation is, or excuse me, what the vote is. And if we're going to go this road, I'd prefer we did it in a more thoughtful manner to maintain the integrity of the testing system, which in fact informs parents about the quality of their schools.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Chris?
Thank you so much for the update. I know that you were put on the spot at the last minute, and we really appreciate what you gathered. Regarding the U.S. Bands competition at the high school on Saturday, do you have the information for any of our viewers who might be interested in helping to volunteer? I know it's a very volunteer-heavy event.
So I don't have the information for Stoughton. I can tell you that I volunteer for King Philip, and my wife is heavily involved. And it takes an unbelievable amount of time and effort to put these events on. They're also an incredible fundraising opportunity, though, to sustain your program. So the more that you can do in terms of concessions and other things, you can generate a lot of revenue so that the school department doesn't have to put up as much money, or parents don't have to go ahead and pay for trips and all the different things that go along with it. So, I mean, people attending, it's a great opportunity. It's an incredible fundraiser for the Stoughton Public Schools Marching Band. And if you want to pick up something in concessions, that would be spectacular because that goes right back to fund the program. I would encourage everybody to do so. I'm looking forward to it. I mean, if you haven't been to a marching band competition, it's absolutely something you should go to and experience.
So conveniently, I have next to me some information for volunteering. If you are interested in volunteering for the event, they are looking for a whole bunch of parents and students who are able to volunteer. There are only a limited number of student volunteer opportunities, but you can contact the POPS Volunteer Coordinator Alicia Henderson at the email address popsvolunteer, that's POPS VOLUNTEER @gmail.com. You will need to complete a query form. All volunteers have to be queried prior to the event because you are interacting with students. But there are a lot of different volunteer opportunities, and volunteers do get in to see the show for free if they want to watch Stoughton perform at 6:30.
Thank you. And I do want to echo what Mr. Ford said about the positive feedback that we got, because when I was walking out last year, even with the torrential rain, it was so miserable. This year looks better, but just how many people, they had no idea who I was. They had no idea I was, from Stoughton. Just the compliments were huge. And the fact that we've been given a state championship with 19 bands is huge, that fact. So wanted to put a plug in for having new, modern, up-to-date facilities that reflect, community use, community needs. So plug for that as well. So anyway, any other questions for Mr. Ford? All right, we can move on to the new business. This was a last-minute donation that came in, opportunity. If you remember, in September, Mr. Christopher Fernandez Nunez, who is a South School parent, wrote to us that his company would like to donate 25 monitors and 2 printers to us. And when the district was picking that up, the company offered us 50 laptops that are approximately 3 years old. Our technology director values this donation at about $27,500. So this is quite a generous offer. And Mr. Anthony Phippen, our education technology supervisor, has recommended that we consider this donation for acceptance, this donation of technology equipment from Karuna Therapeutics. I think this is a great opportunity. We're asking town meeting for the charging carts for the Chromebooks, and I think this is a great way to show that we are trying to fill some of our technology needs with donations and take a little pressure off the budget. These won't last forever, but these will certainly help in the short term, give us some time with these great donations. So any questions or comments? Yes.
Just want to say thank you to Karuna Therapeutics for continuing to think of Stoughton Public Schools. I think this is it's just great to see the community supplying our district with things that we need to support student success. So.
Yes, definitely agreed. Yes.
Are these computers, are they Chromebooks? Are they compatible with the other computers that students are using?
I don't have that information. Do you?
So the students use Chromebooks, and we have looked at Chromebooks for the faculty as well, because Chromebooks really, they work off a mainframe as opposed to being a standalone device. But we can format any device as a virtual laptop, so it doesn't really matter. So we can implement them the same way with a Chromebook, same way with any place else. So this is just a wonderful donation. It's great. The timing is spectacular as well.
Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, absolutely.
All right, if there's any other questions, motion to, yes.
I'll make a motion to accept the donation of 50 laptops from Karuna Therapeutics.
All right, so that motion has been made.
Second.
And seconded by Chris. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Before I say that, I just want to say it was 50 Chromebooks and 2 printers?
We already accepted 25 monitors and 2 printers. This is just for 50 additional laptops.
Okay.
Yes.
Aye.
All right. So this motion is carried 5-0. Again, thank you very much to Mr. Fernandez Nunez for putting us in contact, and thank you very much to Karuna Therapeutics. Very much appreciated. So great news. Moving on to unfinished business. The quick update on the FY25 special town meeting articles and capital planning. We presented these to the Finance Committee on October 9th, and they voted on October 16th to recommend the articles to special town meeting. 12 for, 1 opposed, 1 abstention. Were you able to get the breakdowns of the individual ones? I wasn't able to watch all the Finance Committee meetings.
Yes.
Okay.
I have it right here.
Sure.
Finance Committee voted 11 yes, 3 no, 1 abstention to recommend the the phone purchase, 13-1-1 on the HVAC, 11-3-1 on Chromebooks, and 12-2-1 on the capital needs assessment.
So what was the one capital assessment?
Sorry.
What was the capital assessment? 11?
12-2-1.
12-1, okay. Yes, they took a overall vote and then individually voted them, so, but overall, they have recommended these to move forward, and the next step is to present them at special town meeting on November 18th and November 20th, as far as I understand. Anything else on the special town meeting articles? All right. Moving on to FY26 budget planning. We have a very nice timeline here. Where did it go? I have lost my plot. Ms. Perkins, did you put this together? Oh, thank you very much. So we have a nice timeline. Just a reminder that we have coming up, we're continuing to work. So we have the budget working group is meeting. We'll have a recommendation presented in November. We'll have a public hearing in December and submit this to the town by end of December. Here in Stoughton, we do things where we are working on this budget before the House 1 numbers come out. That's when we would have the initial estimates for our Chapter 70 and SOA funding, our net school spending, et cetera. So just so people have an idea of that. Ms. Perkins, do you have any information for us? I know you gave us some preliminary numbers for the budget.
Yes, and I do want to say, too, that we are requesting that the school committee vote the budget calendar tonight as well. So that was in the ongoing business to talk about next year's budget. And you did have the memo and some breakdowns, but I just wanted to go over it for, people at home that may not have the documents. Essentially, we are working with an anticipated increase, and with that over our FY25 budget. Sorry, I'm working in 3 years, closing 24, working in 25, and preparing 26. So if I misspeak the fiscal year, just catch me. Which would bring that working number at $65,257,429 with the increase. And that's not what we have budgeted. That is some guidance that we were given to work with. So what's before you tonight is just the salaries. There was a grid by essentially the groups, Unit A, Unit B, admin assistants, and some of the others, as you can see on the attachment. Something a little bit different this year is on this document that I wanted to point out. I put food service and some others. In the prior year budget templates, it would, for instance, I'll just use admin assistants, it would say X amount of admin assistants, and then there'd be a note, plus 3 more out of a grant. But you never saw what the total cost is to run the district for staffing. So that's why I did it this way. It's all in the initial column, and then there's the offsets listed separately, and the net is there, and in prior years, you would have only seen the net on the budget document. But I think it's important for everybody to realize what it really takes in the number of people, and it really takes in the dollars. And we rely on the grants and different shelter funds and budgeted turnover, et cetera, which I wove a little bit of that in. It's very early yet, so we don't know what that turnover will look like. Just really to give a more complete picture of what it takes to run the district. So there may be a question of what is non-aligned and the set aside, and I'm just going to point out what that is. There are a number of people within the district who are not under a contract per se, and this is the lines like substitutes and other lines that are not under, they're not in a bargaining unit, so they're non-aligned. They're not aligned to a bargaining unit. And then because we do have 3 units that we will be in negotiations with for next year, we don't know what those amounts will be yet. That's what a set aside is for, the increases on the non-aligned and the bargaining units, pretty much in a pot that's been set aside. So that's essentially what the grid is. I'm just going to bring a couple of very early points to think about as we go through the process. So the staffing budget is 81% of the total budget figure that we're working with. That is pretty common in a school district. So we're not, exorbitant on what the ratio is, expenses to staffing costs. We do rely on some revolving fund offsets. Specifically, you'll see the preschool, because we do have some tuition revenue that comes in, and we use that every year. We obviously will have circuit breaker as we use every year. We, for for now, we used $150,000 as an offset for turnover with retirements, but again, we don't have any word yet of retirements, but so that's probably a little bit conservative. And we're assuming that we're going to continue having shelter funds or additional Chapter 70 SOA money. So as of right now, the state, as you've been aware, we still have not got word from the state of what's happening with the shelter funding from this year. The money that they're paying through this December is their leftover money from last fiscal year. There has been no commitment by the state to do any of it for this entire fiscal year, so DESE is using leftovers right now. But in all honesty, we can't see that there would be a situation where the state wouldn't. And we were told last week that they're waiting for the governor to file a supplemental budget and see what's in there. So we will not know for this year and for next year if we have shelter funds. But again, we are looking forward to, as the chair just mentioned, getting the state numbers. The preliminary cherry sheet should probably come out mid to third week, maybe in January, and that will give us some idea if it's out early enough. And we believe what the town is going to budget is that the the Chapter 70, that they will budget that as revenue plus 3% as a base. So we're just going to plan on the same Chapter 70 from last year plus 3%, and then see if there's additional Chapter 70 above that, and then that will be further discussion when those numbers come out. So that's pretty much what's making up what you're seeing now. There's a few things that I just wanted to bring up. We do have quite a few people that could be mandated positions that are being paid out of the shelter. So it's not cut and dried that if we don't have shelter funds or some other source of additional funds from Chapter 70, that the funds would go away and the people being paid of those funds also would not have positions in the district. It's not cut and dried like that. It could very well be that we have some positions that are being currently paid out of the shelter funds through mandates or just needs on the subpopulations that we have, that we would have to fit into the operating budget, which is not reflected here right now. So there's really a lot of wait and see still to go with what happens with that. And the other thing is our bus contract is all through this year. We'll be going out to bid. We have heard of some districts opening up their bus bids and they're more than 20% of an increase. We've heard some that are lesser. So we will be working with probably a 15% increase when we do the expense budget for a 10 to 15 for the expense budgets that we give you in the coming month, and just assuming that, but obviously we won't know until we open the bus bid. That also assumes that we will not be adding any buses, and of course, if we have redistricting and all sorts of other things, that could be a very large number. So right now we'll be working with, as if we have the same number of buses that we budgeted for this year, not adding an extra, that we budgeted for this year, with a presumed increase or a range of an increase, just to set the base. And then as discussions go on of whether there's a bus that was added, stays added, or all the things that have to be discussed. So I just wanted to sort of lay out a couple of things that'll be pressure points, because the bus increase I do think will be significant, but even with 10%, it'd be about 115,000. So it's not the end of the world, but again, that could be 2 teachers or a teacher and a para. So I just wanted to point out some of the pressure points. And I think there's really not a whole lot more to say at this time. But if you had any questions about what goes into it, again, it's lanes. We won't know those, but we budget a certain amount that's contractual for lane changes for the teachers, so that is captured in here. But steps and a presumed COLA on those that are not aligned. The other ones are all ready. We have their contracts for next year, so that's a known. And increases on longevity or whatever there may be, and the appendix stipends, et cetera. So those, most of it, our larger unions are settled for next year. So fortunately, the larger portion, we do actually have solid numbers. So.
Any questions? Yes, Armando.
Is it possible that the shelter funding will not be there, or at least lower than last year, and also the SOA money?
The shelter funds, we do not know what we're going to get this year. So this assumes that we have shelter funds that will either come in or be significantly enough this year, and we don't need it all, that we have something to carry over to next year. So right now, as you can see on the backup pages, it says less shelter relief funds in a couple of spots. That's what we're doing this year. So we're going with that for now. And again, that would be a combination of, can we keep those positions if we don't have a funding source? Or do we have to take a look at some of them and say maybe some of them we have to keep, and maybe some of them we're tied to, the increase right now, and whatever happens with the state fluctuates. We don't know what's going to happen with the state. So, but again, I do anticipate, just because I can't see how they would leave districts like ours and everybody else's left high and dry without passing in a supplemental budget, that there's going to be aid. I just can't imagine that the state would do that. And then eventually the students, if they stay living in Stoughton and we have the increases in the enrollment and all of those things, that we would anticipate that they would be captured in the Chapter 70 after this coming year, because it's the following year that you get the Chapter 70. But again, just as a reminder, that money goes to the municipality, not directly to the schools. And then even if it is there, then that has to be further discussion about how that money is allocated within the town and within the school budget.
Any requirement for the shelter money to absolutely come back to the schools, or can the town actually take that money?
The shelter money comes directly to the schools. It's like a DESE grant. So all of the money that we received for our students from last year, that money has come in. Most of it came in over the summer, which caused a very tight budget situation through last year because we were fronting a lot of the costs, but then the largest payment came in actually in August. So, we are hoping that at the end of this year, there will be at least some money that we will receive this year that we can carry over, but it really depends on how our budget goes this year and what we need to do, and also if the state comes through with more money. So we'll have a little bit better idea, I think, probably right after the holidays, when we see if there's been any movement with the state, because the first round that's promised right now is through right before the holidays. That's the last end date for the data collection to do and then we wouldn't receive that money. Last time they did it takes a couple months for DESE to go through all the numbers and verify, so we probably wouldn't get our first payment this year until probably mid-February. And again, if they did 3 data collections, then we would get the next one around May and the next one around August. So we really have to see if they're changing anything and if they vote additional funds.
One more question. This is a hard question. I know it's probably impossible to answer. First of all, I love planning.
Okay.
Love planning. Love to see things like this. I know things are dynamic in the school. The plans of tomorrow is something different when you get to tomorrow often, but still love to see it and love to see a great deal more of it. And the question I have that's probably impossible to answer, when along the coming weeks and months do we get to a point where you feel relatively 90% confident that the numbers are good?
That is a loaded question. If we weren't looking at the shelter positions and the shelter funding, because that's really the most unknown right now, because we also use a year behind in circuit breaker, so I have a known number on that, which is helpful from a lot of districts that use it in the year they get it, then you really are just have no solid footing. So I would say once we get our budget finished to come in with the superintendent's recommended budget will go to the working group. Once we finish the whole budget, then it goes to the working group to go over, but the superintendent's recommended budget goes first. When we get to that, we will, I think, feel overall pretty confident with what our guidance, or some information we've received from the town, as well as we know what some of our funding is. And we use some of our grants a year behind, which we're allowed to do, not all of it, but some of it. So we will know what we have there. If there's any, most of it's not necessarily for positions, and I'll go back to that in a second too. It'll really be about the shelter assistance that will be up in the air. But when it goes to public hearing in December, I'm hopeful that the state will have given us word if they're at least going to continue the data collection through the end of the year and doing a 104 a day per student reimbursement. That'll really tell us a lot. Again, that would carry into next year by the time we get it. We are allowed to end in a deficit on that fund. In fact, we did this year only because with all grants, you end in a deficit and it's a reimbursement. That's the way almost every grant works. So that's the norm. So knowing that the data collection was coming, the town knew if we, for instance, used X amount for our budget for 24, that money was promised by the state to come in over the summer. So if we have the promise, we know that we can use the funds throughout the year, even if they haven't been physically received yet. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought on something else. I was going to go back to something, and maybe it'll come back. But so I think we will be pretty solid when the public hearing comes. The only spongy part of that, I'll say, is if we have a solid guidance from the state on what their plans are for the shelter funding. But again, that means that you just might have to not have all the positions that the shelter funding is carrying. We do use it for the buses. Obviously, if there weren't shelters, we wouldn't have the buses. That would automatically go hand in hand. So presumably, if the shelters are here, there's going to be some form of funding. And if the shelters weren't here, the spending wouldn't be needed. The gap that you're going to have here is you have increasing L population that is not from the shelters. So some of those positions are partially from the newcomer students and partially from our internal increasing L population. So it doesn't mean that it just comes out the same. Whether the shelter students are here or not, some of those positions would have been needed and will continue to be needed regardless. And if they're being shelter funded right now, that's where we're going to have a little bit of a squeeze trying to know that we have to keep them and how are we going to get them into the budget. If that's,
So,
hopefully I answered that
you're about
well enough to be clear.
90% confident the numbers are good around early December?
Yes, I mean, obviously we have to have the public hearing, so we're going to come in with a finished budget at that time that you would vote, and we won't know, again, just like last year, there may be revisions after the fact when the state numbers come out. And that could be new information on shelter funding, it could be, and so that could mean we have to cut, or there could be new information with additional Chapter 70 money, which might mean we don't have to cut regardless of the shelter funds, and or there can be some other things. And I will say with rising population across the board in Stoughton, I would not be surprised if we end up having to add 1 or 2 classrooms again, as we did this year, long after the budget was completed, which had nothing to do with the shelters. So we did add a kindergarten classroom. That teacher is shelter funded. So again, if we needed to keep that many K classes and we didn't have some funding, we would have to suddenly, take that teacher position and put it into the budget. But we also added a grade 3, which just had to do with rising population, which presumably there'd be, there's probably a bubble, maybe that goes up to grade 4, whatever happens with the registration. And so that also was added after the budget, so that is already baked in to the numbers I gave you. So it's the best I can tell you right now until we have a little bit more information, but we will come forth with a completed budget with some assumptions built in for some funding. And I have to see after the holidays when we have more information from the state.
There's no way of having our ears to the grapevine and
We
get
have. We have. I think Matt was at a meeting with the people who run the shelter.
The second it's known, we will know.
I was in a meeting the day before with with all the business managers, also with Desi about the shelter funding just this week. I was in on one day, you were at a meeting the next day with Amy Crayley, I think. So DESE is holding a lot of meetings, but DESE has made it quite clear that they themselves do not know. Department of Education does not know. The state has not given them guidance yet on what they're going to do. So there's no more for us to learn. And I know that Dr. Baeta also is in touch with some legislators and different people, trying to find out everything he can, and in the superintendent's groups, and every which way, all of us in our lanes are trying to get the latest and greatest information for you and for ourselves to be able to do this work. But right now, there's just there's nowhere else to go until Governor Haley comes out with the supplemental budget, and then Department of Ed will let us know if there's funding in there.
Sounds like it's above and beyond the call of duty, trying to get these numbers and better understanding.
It's an unusual circumstance, I will say that.
Thank you.
Any other questions for, yes, Karen?
Hey, so I have two questions.
Sure.
First, do you have an idea of how many of these mandated positions we will have? A rough estimate. I think you listed about 18 positions on here. About how many do you think you might need to keep if we lose the shelter funds?
So we have one nurse. I'm not going to necessarily have everybody at the top of my head, but 13K paras, one nurse. We have 2 building-based substitutes that are sort of bus monitors, AM, PM, from the shelter locations that then stay at the school as building-based subs. Trying to think who else.
But how many do you think of those going to be the mandated that will need to stay due to our rising Ls?
So Amy Qualey is still, the numbers are fluctuating a little bit right now, but we are still seeing increasing numbers regardless of shelters or not shelters. So until the year moves on and she sees if there's more of an increase, but additionally, I don't know if she's presented recently in front of the school committee, I don't recall. The levels that some of the students are testing at, again, shelter or non, also drives how many staff you need, because it says how many minutes of additional support they need per week. So right now it's very, very heavy. So really, probably I would say, around the time where the budget is voted, the public hearing happens and the budget is voted in December, we'll be able to give you somewhat of an update, but again, it's very much fluctuating as people move in and out of town. And
Are we talking
and Jonathan, I know, has some of the numbers too. Well, of course, the K aides are not mandated at any time, so there's that, and I'm not saying that for any reason other than to try and answer your question. So I don't want anybody hearing this to think that there's a plan. There is not a plan to do anything about that at this time, or any plan. The nurse, we would have to look at whether that position needs to stay or it does not under a mandate. The building-based subs, bus monitors, are certainly not mandated positions. I really can't think off the top of my head right now a position that would be mandated to keep. However, I do think that there may be change before the end of the year with the numbers that we may have 1 or 2 that professional positions, most likely, that might have to be put into the budget.
Sure, okay. All right,
And again,
thank you for that.
And that extra teacher, just for
Yep.
the rising enrollment. So we have a teacher, maybe 2, so that's 3 professional positions, just throwing out a guess right
Yep.
now, an educated guess, but, so we'll have to see
Yep, okay.
what else
All
happens
right.
as we go along.
And then on this sheet, this was the 65 million. That was based off of a 3.8% increase guidance from the town?
Yes.
Okay, so the town, I don't know where they get their numbers. We don't have our numbers yet. But they have number of 3.8% increase. And we have, after all of our offsets and all the money that the state and federal gives to the schools for students, that leaves us 53 million. So if they're only giving us if they think that we should only have $65 million budget, and we need $53 million for all of this staffing, that leaves us with only $12 million for supplies and services.
Correct.
And that's going to include buses that are going to increase by about 20% next year.
It's going to include
Am I understanding
buses,
that?
out-of-district tuition for special education, all of those things.
All those
However,
things going
this-
up.
now I remember what I was going to come back to. So in the past, let me just say that some of the offsets that were from grants in the past were on the salary side. We are not paying all the salaries out of the grants anymore. We're switching it, so you will see some of that when you get the expense budget. It's the same amount of money, but when we pay professional salaries out of federal grants, we are required to pay 9% to the Mass Teachers Retirement System.
That answers that
So
question.
we are making that flip on all the positions that we can, and it's only for professional, MTRS eligible positions, so that we are not, donating 9% of some of our grant
No, I
funds.
appreciate you saving the
So-
district money like that. That's a smart move right there, and appreciated.
So there are a couple that we have to, because of the confines of a grant, of what you have to do with it, but it's going to be very minimal. And we will keep some of the paras, probably in the grants, because we are not subject to that 9%. But by and large, on the special education grant, the largest one, the IDEA 240 grant, that one, we are probably switching out about $1 million in salaries that is now in here, and that $1 million will go against transportation or OOD. So we just will save a fair amount of money by doing that, so. it's-
Okay. So all of that is going to be included in this leftover 12 million that somehow we need to
12
fit
million is
into
going to
there.
be, here's our number, minus the grant offset
Yeah,
and the
that's-
circuit breaker, and here's where we land. And then when we put that together, we'll see if that comes out within the 3.8% guidance. And we will, I believe we will.
can try.
I believe we will work very hard to come within that 3.8% guidance. And it's not uncommon, it's about 50-50 probably, that towns give a guidance number early. I actually prefer it. I'm glad we got that early, just to see where we are and what the pressure points might be, rather than having no guidance. So I prefer that myself, so you know what you're working with, and instead of being, in the dark. with
This might be
where
more
you're-
for Catherine, but if this is going to be the pressure points and it's going to be close, does that mean that we may have to, as a committee, reinstitute fees for things like buses, which I understand our fees, even though they were expensive for families, I don't even think it came close to the cost of the
Right.
busing. Actually, the school bear the brunt of the busing. And it also may need to also increase fees on, or reinstitute fees on athletics?
I think-
Is that possible?
Unfortunately, it's going to be one of those things we're going to have to think about. It's going to be on the table. And again, we have to think about the fact that, you're right, the busing fees barely cover the bus. I think it costs like something like $1,000 per student for a bus. So, the fees didn't come close, but it is something we have to think about. Like, is there the fees, if we do bring them back, need to be purposeful. They can't just be fees for the sake of fees. But I think everything has to be on the table once we see the numbers come out. Again, we don't know. I would hope that we get some sort of kind of preference list, like if things that we can add back in, if we do get additional Chapter 70 funding, because that's completely up in the air, what that's going to look like. But certainly anything's on the table in the working group. I'm sure we'll talk over that and, think through what that means as they start to look at the numbers and report back to us on that. But it's certainly all on the table. If it's something that we're going to reinstitute, we need to talk about it early and are often, because parents need to be prepared and need to start saving up for it
Yeah.
if there is going to be any sort of fee.
Yeah, we don't want to, we want to
No.
let parents know as soon as possible if there's going to be
Right.
busing
And
issues.
if we find out, for example,
Institution of fees.
right, if the shelter funding is going to continue through the rest of the year, and we're going to have plenty this year, and fees are something to talk about for not for this coming school year, but the year after. Again, we should talk about it early and often, but again, you hate to bring it back, but if it's something that keeps something on the, some of
Yeah.
our services for our students, especially for our things that benefit our full students, we're going to have to look at it. So
right,
it's
thank
going to
you.
be a
Thank
very
you.
hard conversation.
Thank you, Ms. Perkins. Appreciate all this information, too.
Any other questions, comments, reports from the budget working group? I know you've already had some discussions.
I'll just say the full budget working group hasn't met yet, although
Okay.
Armando and Dr. Bayetta and I have chatted a bit. But yeah, I think the 3.8%, as you said, Ms. Perkins, includes all of our compensation amount at about 81%, right, of that increase, which you said is like typical. So I think, I think this will allow us to meet those needs, and also we'll have to obviously take a hard look at some of the other decisions, keep an eye on state aid. I'm also interested to think about like what we can start planning for long term as we think about the triennial plan, and just like, I know obviously that doesn't do a lot to mitigate the needs that we have right in front of us right now, but I do think it's an opportunity to think like strategically down the road a bit more too.
Thank you. Yes, that's definitely something we need to think about too, is, reacting now versus planning from the future. The Student Opportunity Act ends in just a few years, correct? The Student Opportunity Act ends in, what do we have, 3 more years of it?
So we're in year 1 right now.
We're in your, okay.
Yeah, so there's 2 more years in this current plan. We do have an allocation of funding related to the initiatives within that. And we will meet on accountability at the end of this year, next year, the following year.
Okay. So we only have a few more years of that to think about as we plan, and that might be one of the things we think about, what are we going to do in these next few years in terms of planning for long term? Yes.
Yeah, what are your gut feeling?
Like I asked her hard questions, I'm going to ask you both of you hard questions. What are your gut feeling that the Student Opportunity Act is going to continue and won't?
Well, I can't, I can't imagine that they would slash our funding by that amount. What I believe, and this is what happened last time, is when you accept the funding, you have to generate plans to meet the goals of the state. So they'll give you focus areas where you have to allocate the funding and do accountability in implementing the funding in those areas, specifically to address needs the state perceives in your district and across the Commonwealth. Now you put all these positions in place, you put these programs in place, you're working towards their goals. What they're banking on is you put them and you realize a gain and you have institutionalized positions, and that you don't then pull those back when the funding ends, because what are we going to lay off all of our instructional coaches? But they're not going to pull the funding. I mean, that would be a disaster across the entire Commonwealth. And you may have a different take on this, but I can't see a scenario play out where they're going to take away $2 million of Chapter 78, which is what SOA funding is. So they're not going to cut our SOA or our Chapter 70 allocation by whatever the amount is we've received.
Okay, thank you.
So I don't.
Yeah, I would share the same expectation that we haven't been given any. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Obviously, it's very early. It's a couple of years out. We haven't been given any indication of what the state will do. However, I agree with Mr. Ford. It would be disastrous to every school district. So I anticipate that it will continue. I don't know if it'll keep pace with inflation and the cost of wages, or if they'll sort of set a floor or a ceiling, I should really say, and that's where they keep it. It remains to be seen.
And just to state again, although the money was allocated to us under the Student Opportunity Act, it's a Chapter 70 allocation. So it's not a separate fund. It was just an increase in the allocation we received under Chapter 70. So, derived from the same formula that derives our Chapter 70 allocation.
Okay.
Chris, question?
Yes, please. Thank you so much for these planning documents. It's very helpful to review these ahead of time. I would like to add my thank yous to Karen's regarding the change that you made in terms of how you allocate some of the non-contractual staff budgets to the various offset funding sources that we have. If my math is correct, that means that if we are not paying that 9%, then we're saving approximately $379,116 that can be funneled back in. Is my math correct on that?
I don't have the grants in front of me. Oh, sorry. Do that again. I don't have the grants in front of me. It really is the portion of a grant that is currently being allocated to professional salaries will be the base that changes. And it's mostly the IDEA grant. We have a couple in Title I that have to stay in Title I, so that won't change. But then they're not captured in here in any case. So it's a fair amount of money, and when you take all of the grants together, especially with ESSER and everything over the last few years, I mean, you see it in front of your eyes, and you go, oh, I got to send that. You send it right, the state gives it to you, and you got to send it right back to them. So we're trying to get away from that and just make sure that we're using every cent in-house. So
I just wanted to call that out again for the public viewing, just so they know that the administration is making every effort that they can to ensure that the budget is as functional and lean as possible moving forward. So some of the questions I had in regards to the positions that are currently being paid for by the temporary shelter funding, I wondered if you had a dollar amount for those positions, or if you could get that for us.
Here. Well, some of it, so we had in the first line down, it's listed at 68,765. If you look under the less offsets column, shelter relief funds. And then a couple more down under where the paraprofessionals are, shelter relief or additional Chapter 70. And I put that in that, I mentioned that intentionally because. Oh, I'm so sorry. Although I'm pretty loud to begin with. Shelter relief or additional Chapter 70 if the shelter funds run out, and instead they capture the students in the Chapter 70 and increase our Chapter 70. However, the state determines to have this money come to us. Together, that 390,017 and 54.6 is 444,617. And then this, down the bottom, the non-aligned shelter relief funds is 13,650. So 460 and 70, like 530 maybe.
Okay.
Just off the top of my head.
So that would be,
I don't know.
If poor choice of words, but worst case scenario, fiscally speaking, all of those positions ended up being mandated for some reason because of our L population, our school population size, and just the internal tensions that we're facing that impact the budget. We would be looking at finding an additional $530,000 to continue to support those positions,
And that
should they be required, et cetera. And I know you've already had the discussion of whether or not they're mandated, but I did want to make that explicit.
Yes.
We cannot rely on temporary funding sources to fund positions that we need and are required to have in our schools.
Yes, and that is, specifically why I listed all of the positions as if you didn't have these funding sources, this is really what it takes to run the school district as is right now.
Yeah.
And some of the funding sources are pretty solid. The federal grants we get every year slightly change in the amounts, but they stay pretty static. And some of them are really for special programming or whatever that's very narrow that you really can't use as an offset to your budget. So, but the larger ones, the title grants specifically, and the IDEA grant, special ed, are pretty solid. You pretty much can count on them year over year, and those you can plan on. But again, it's important, I think, for everybody to know that if anything ever did change and we didn't have that funding or any of this funding, that's what you would have to add in. Similarly, when we get to the expense budgets and we're talking about the circuit breaker, et cetera, those funds. So it's rather than just seeing, that is the one thing in prior budget documents that you did have at the bottom that would show that specifically. But, just adding any other expenses that we pay. So like I said, when you get the expense budget this time, since it's not in the salaries for offsets right now, you will see that as transportation or OOD out of that special ed grant as an offset, et cetera, to say, these funds are, it's not just local funds that are supporting the school. There's the Chapter 70 that the town gets every year, SOA, and then there's also federal grants and other state grants that altogether are needed to run the school as it is. And I do want to just add that we had a couple of things this year that we had cut that we were able to bring back with some of the revolving funds, which is old fees, which are the late buses, the extra bus. Can't think of anything else off the top of my head. And we do pay 1.5 salaries every year out of the building revolving, which comes out of the rentals. So we use that rental money to pay one of our admin assistants and a 0.5 groundskeeper every year. And the other funds that were the old fees right now, some of that is supporting some of the athletics purchases over the last year. They do have the gate fees that continue to go in to that revolving fund. But other than that, the transportation and building revolving, I think the last of the fees that were left in those revolving accounts will pretty much be gone at the end of this year. So those have also been used to support what we have right now.
Okay, thank you. One more question, then one comment for the chair. So the last question I have is you're operating under the assumption of a 3.8% increase. What percentage increase do we need simply to increase the staff wages, specifically Unit A, Unit B? So it makes it sound like we've got an extra 3.8%, of our budget to play with. How much of that is already accounted for because of contractual obligations?
There's two ways of looking at that. Is it the 3.8 that's going towards their raises, or is it our base budget that we already have now that's going towards those raises, and the 3.8 is helping us support our expense budget? So I really can't, for that reason alone, I can't really answer that, but also I don't have the numbers of each group in front of me, and some of these are lumped together. This includes our substitute lines. When you look at the budget, you have subs, you have a hospital and home tutoring for $20,000. There's a lot of salary lines that are captured in here. It's not necessarily a position. Stipends, longevity, all of those things are in here. So we went through and just took every line that would be considered salaries and made sure that was in this presentation. We put out guidance to all of our budget makers that here's what you had last year, and you can go up no more than 2%. We are not certain if we actually have 2% to give them yet until we collate, which we're working on now, collate all of those expense budgets, put in a factor for, do we have to put anything extra in for utilities? I don't know yet. And certainly the bus, whatever the buses will be next year. And that's assuming the same number that we budgeted this year. Now, the school committee did take a vote to add one back, and that'll be, as we work through the working group, is that becoming our base now, or is that, which was being taken out of the old fees for this year, is that going to be a base that we're going to incorporate into the base? And everybody, needs to realize if, and I'm not saying for or against or anything about that, I'm just saying if that becomes part of the base, then the 2% on everything else that they need, from textbooks to markers or whatever, could suffer for that as well. So there's, the committee has a lot of things to talk about as we go on. But again, we will put together, coming in at or around 3.8% for the superintendent's recommended budget. And then that will go to the work group after that, which is typically how it's done. It becomes the superintendent's recommended budget, and then it becomes the school committee recommended budget after the superintendent's recommended budget. So that's when, if there's any tweaking, or, the working group or committee has anything that they want to delete this and add that, or specifically changing it from the superintendent's recommended budget, that's when that would happen. But that's when a lot of discussion can happen in some of those meetings too. And whether it's just to educate and say, here's what we have, here's what we can and can't change, or that there's some priorities that maybe need to be jockeyed around, during that time.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And lastly, a comment for you, Madam Chair. Wanted to just plant the seed. The committee has discussed before the idea, and Lindsay brought it up, thank you, around triennial planning, capital planning, and being able to create a line item around capital planning, if anything, to deal with sudden unexpected expenses that come up. So we don't have to continually go to town meeting or we have the ability to compile that account in a way that can address kind of larger expenses that are not part of the operational budget, aside from the larger expenses that require, going out for. But just once again, I think that's something that the town has expressed interest in. At least I know that's something that I heard at town meeting, so I would like the committee to consider that going forward.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Jumpy? Yes, a lot. I know, but budget stuff gets pretty heavy pretty fast. So we need to vote the timeline. Oops.
I actually have a thought on that.
Sure.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off.
go ahead.
So I think I have some thoughts here. We just got this timeline tonight, so
Right.
I'd be curious to take some time to compare it to previous years. I also am just looking at the proposed time between the first presentation of the superintendent's recommended budget and the school committee vote, knowing that we just talked about everything being on the table, wanting the public to have plenty of time to hear about potential changes. I'm curious if there would be room to make that a larger window between the first presentation and the school committee vote.
We currently have a meeting scheduled for November 12th, one for November 19th, one for December 3rd, and then one for December 10th.
Yeah.
So if we need to schedule an additional one the week after, we get kind of close to our recommended deadline from the town, but, that is a possibility. I guess the question is there a reason that we need to vote this? Well, I mean, obviously it says some timeliness, but are we able to look at this?
That's your call.
Okay.
Just as a comment, I don't think the November 19th superintendent's recommended can be moved up any earlier. I would
Okay.
say that even that's a tall order, to be honest with you.
Okay.
You're going into the holidays. And my
Right.
understanding is that the public hearing must take place by bylaw in December.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't, if you add meetings, that's
Yeah.
a possibility. And that's why on the December budget working groups, et cetera, it just says dates TBD, a couple places, two places on here to say that you may add, once you pick your date or dates, you also might decide that you want to add some, so that it was pretty open for that too.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I forgot that we had a meeting on the 3rd. I was thinking it was just the 10th. So that's helpful that there's another public opportunity to make sure we're talking about it. I'd be
Right.
interested in maybe penciling in a meeting for the 17th.
Okay.
I don't know. That's a lot of meetings,
Yes.
but also want to make sure that
We could always,
we're not catching anybody by surprise.
Right. We could always have it be just budget
Yeah.
if we need to, and just sit down for an hour and hash it out. And then certainly the one on the 3rd could be just budget if we want to do that as well. We haven't, it's on the calendar, but up for revision. We knew that we would possibly need some additional time. And we do also have the November 25th workshop with the MASC, which is our good chance. At that point, we'll have seen a kind of a budget, and we'll be able to bring specific questions to the MASC about, Chapter 70. They're going to present to us Chapter 70 funding, the formula. We can also talk about and kind of dig into some questions about the budget. They're probably not expecting us to be quite as far along, but I've alerted them that we have to submit our budget by December so that they know that we are going to be pretty far into the budget process and not just hearing about kind of our pressure points and things like that, a general thing. I don't know what everybody's thoughts. Do we want to wait on this guidelines timeline and vote it next time? Are you ready to vote it tonight?
I think my preference would be to wait till the next meeting unless there's like a time-sensitive reason that it would need to happen tonight. Is that, okay.
Okay. Are we okay with that? All right, so I will put that on the agenda for next meeting. I'm going to have to make sure I do not lose my notes for tonight. Otherwise, it's going to be very strict. All right, moving along. We have very quick redistricting update. Just a reminder, I'm going to repeat this pretty much every time because this will be news to somebody. A reminder that redistricting means redrawing the boundary lines for who goes to which elementary school. We are redistricting regardless of the decision on the South Elementary School, whatever we decide to do with that, because of increased enrollment throughout the town. And this will affect all elementary schools. The redistricting committee's first meeting was originally scheduled for this Thursday. I have not gotten the info yet either, so I will check in with, I think it's Ms. Miller is in charge of that, so I will check in and see what's going on, if that is scheduled for this Thursday or not. Anything else on redistricting right now? We can move on. South Elementary School building needs update. Unfortunately, Dr. Beta was not here to present. I don't know if either of you are ready to present on one of the classrooms, but he gathered some preliminary information for us. So I would like to put this on the agenda for next time and sort of dig into that. I know that he had some things that he wanted to share about that information, and we just got this at the meeting, so I am not prepared to kind of tell you what this is. So any questions about that, or if not? As next is the elementary school building committee. As Mr. Ford mentioned, the meeting was postponed, and so it's now tomorrow, Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024 at 7 p.m. It will be virtual. Some of the members of the school building committee were at the pumpkin patch to present, although the South School population sort of knows very well the project. I do want to mention that the Finance Committee referred the PAC's petition article to the special town meeting after much debate. That was an 11-2-2 vote, I believe. One of the things that keeps coming up is people asking, why don't we just replace the South? Like, just do the South. Forget all this consolidation. And there's a couple of reasons. One is the MSBA process really prefers consolidation. Most of the schools that they've built over the past, since 2019, have been around 630 students. The smallest was 315 students. That was a Randolph school, which is bigger than the replacement of just the South School that they're proposing for us. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the MSBA gets 50 to 60 applicants every year. They only have a handful of projects that they approved. They can't afford to have towns coming back year after year after year after year to replace buildings. So they move towards consolidated schools. But it's also more cost efficient to build a larger school that can accommodate more students. I think we can accommodate almost double the amount of students for about 50% more of the cost with this consolidated building. And it's also about the long-term plans for the district. We are looking to downsize the amount of buildings, and we keep hearing you need to be fiscally prudent, you need to be fiscally conservative, and having to maintain 8 buildings, several of which were quite old. All of our elementary schools are over 50 years old. We have the Jones School, which is almost 100 years old. So having to replace those, to have those buildings be maintained, or having to replace them all individually is a huge expense. This having a consolidated school allows us to replace the Wilkins HVAC system via grant. Allows us to move the preschool out of the Jones, which would allow us to do something with this building, possibly even close it, downsize to 6 as opposed to even 7 buildings. But that's up for debate, so that's not a firm plan yet. The MSBA does not fund renovations of preschools and administrative spaces. So this building would have to be, if this is to be renovated or replaced, it would be entirely on the town's dime. So that's one of the reasons that we're trying to think long-term. How can we, focus on our stock? And there's a lot of benefits for that. Efficiencies of teachers. We have teachers that commute between the different buildings, the special teachers. This would have them have to do that fewer and allow them to spend more time with students. So there's a lot of benefits to having this. So it's not just about replacing the Southwest, because there is a long-term plan to it. That's the facilities master plan, which is on our website and has been since we voted it in March of 2023. People keep forgetting we have that, so just wanted to bring that up. Moving along to the minutes from October 8th, 2024. Any amendments for the October 8th minutes? Sure.
Mine is on page 3 under unfinished business B, FY26 budget planning. Just wanted to clarify that the appointment was to the working group on the town and school agreement regarding school-related town expenses. So just wanted to make sure that full name was in there.
I also had one on the last page, page 5, under the second paragraph under correspondences. I thanked the event committee chaired by Deborah Roberts and the Richard family for setting this up. So want to give credit where credit's due. So, another one, Chris?
Also on page 3, under 5B, unfinished business, FY26 budget planning, second sentence should say the budget working group will meet soon.
Oh, yes. It's over there. Any others? All right. Is there a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
So moved.
All right, made by Chris, second.
Second.
Seconded by Lindsay. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, so that's carried 5-0. The next item on the agenda is the MASC resolutions for the annual conference. A reminder that the joint annual conference is November 6th through 9th in Hyannis, and Lindsay and Armando are attending. Chris and I attended the learning lunch that I deferred this for the last meeting and did not find it all that helpful.
Not a lot of learning.
Not a lot of learning going on in that one. So there's actually more information in this packet than I think we got there. Just a note, we don't have to vote or approve any of this. This is just a recommendation for the delegate assembly. Last year, we only voted on one, or we only had our delegate vote on one. So in the interest of making Armando's life easier, I am totally open to just having us vote on one. Or we could have one where we could have him vote no. Like, please don't vote on, please vote no on this. I'll take recommendations from the floor for any that the committee would like us to take up and consider. Yes, Lindsay.
I think Resolution 7, which is to fully adjust Chapter 78 for inflation, sponsored by the Everett School Committee, makes a lot of sense. I think based on the discussion we just had about Chapter 70, historically, maybe not being fully adjusted for inflation, like this would be something that directly impacts our budget. It's something that falls within the jurisdiction of the school committee. And I think the MASC is positioned to make that recommendation to the legislature in ways that they maybe aren't on some of the other proposed resolutions. So that would be, I'd like to authorize our delegate, Armando, to vote yes on Resolution 7.
I was going to make the exact same proposal.
Yes.
So was I.
Yes. I think this one is the one that also has the most advantage to the district with the least cost to us. Some of the other ones, you know, the cost, there is a cost, as Dr. Baida mentioned, either in terms of time and or money. This one, I think, is also politically a good one for us, too, to support this, because this is saying, like, this helps us adjust for that expenses line. That's where we're seeing some of our issues, is the, you know, the interest rates and the increases in these supplies and busing. So this would be really helpful to us. So I'm fully on board with Resolution 7. Karen, any thoughts?
No, I'm good with it.
Yes.
I'd like to listen to their recommendation, if they have any recommendation related to the resolution.
I would absolutely agree with the full funding based on inflation. That's the one that stood out to me out of all of them.
Thank you.
And I know Heidi's not near the mic, but we nodded in very strong agreement, so I think you get a pretty unanimous thing happening around the table.
All right. Anything?
So-
Yes.
In that case, I'd like to make a motion that we authorize Armando, or wait, were you looking at me or were you looking at Armando? I'm sorry.
I was looking to you to finish your motion. But
Okay, sorry. I didn't want to like talk over you. If you had something else to say, I apologize. Anyway, I'd like to make a motion to authorize Armando to vote yes on Resolution 7 at the MASC annual conference.
All right,
On behalf of,
on behalf of the Stoughton School
On
Committee.
behalf of the Stoughton School Committee. Thank you, Chris.
Is there a second?
second.
All right, seconded by Chris. Motion's been made and seconded. Any more questions or debate? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, that's carried 5-0. So Armando, that spares you from having to, you can zone out during some of the other discussions or report back if you find them some really interesting, but that's your charge. So thank you. Pilgrim Area Collaborative update. Lindsay, do you think you had a short one?
Yeah, very short and sweet. The Pilgrim Area Collaborative doesn't meet, or the board doesn't meet over the summer. So October 3rd, I think, the first Thursday of the month, we had our first meeting of the 24-25 school year. It was sort of housekeeping, staff changes, program changes, little updates there. So not a huge update, but meetings have resumed, and I should have a more substantive update before the end of the calendar year.
Sounds good. Thank you. If anybody else has any updates as the year goes on, yes, Chris?
Not an update, but other business.
Okay. Can I get through a couple things, then I'll get to you? Okay. Correspondence, again, we had the invitation to the OMS Veterans Day Assembly on Thursday, November 7th at 9:30. I believe the OMS is still looking for veterans who are interested in participating in the brunch and ceremony. You should have gotten your invitation, your VIP invitation to the U.S. Bands Championships. If you did not, let me know. Check your email.
Do you know if they would accept active servicemen, or is it only veterans?
I don't know. Mr.
They would accept active.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak for them, but always have, and yeah, I would have them reach out. Yep.
All right. One more order of business before we get to other business. We had a very last minute request come in. Adult Principal Mr. Rob Cancelleri was able to secure a grant for the Heroes and Helpers grant from Target for the Shop with a Cop event that takes place every year in December. The grant is in the form of gift cards, which I believe is why it comes to us to approve this. There's 15 $100 gift cards that will be divided among the schools. Mr. Cancelleri is working with Sergeant Flanagan of the Stoughton Police Department to organize this event, which will be on December 22nd. So this has come to us as a very last-minute request to consider for accepting so that they can move forward with the planning this event. I don't know if you have any more information. This is the information that I have. This came in just, I think, yesterday. So does anybody have any questions? All right. Any motion to accept this?
I will make a motion to, I'll make a motion to accept the Heroes and Helpers grant from Target.
So the motion's been made to accept it by Lindsay. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, second by Chris. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, that motion is carried 5-0. And now to other business, Chris.
As you referenced before, I know that Karen and I were able to attend the South Schools Pumpkin Patch Festival, which was last Saturday. I don't know if anyone else got a chance to go. But we can attest that despite the space and facility challenges, they were able to leverage what they could inside the school, had an amazing turnout. And a ton of high school students were there. I was told 60 OMS and Stoughton High School students were volunteering at the event. And it was, we were really heartwarmed to see how much of the event was geared toward the community and not toward fundraising. There were a lot of things that were being given away for free. A lot of activities. The PTO should be commended because they put a lot of effort into making sure that families on a limited budget could still come and enjoy a family-friendly event at no cost to them. We enjoyed some great food. I don't know if you won any of the raffles.
None.
Not one. We supported the raffles, and it was just it was a really great event. So kudos to the PTO and the staff of South School.
Thank you very much. Any other business? All right, our next meeting is Tuesday, November 12th, oops, skipping a month, November 12th, here in the conference room at district offices. And we have that meeting scheduled on the 19th, as well as the MASC budget workshop on the 25th. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, made by Chris, seconded?
Second.
Seconded by Lindsay. It's been moved and seconded. Roll call votes.
Aye.
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 All right, so that motion is carried 5-0. The meeting is adjourned at 8:19. Thank you all for coming, and good night.